My wife and I are always delighted to have an opportunity to visit Spain, and especially the Basque region. And this visit is particularly wonderful because we greatly admire the Guggenheim Museum, and to have the opportunity to give a talk here is very, very special, as is everything else we've experienced in this visit. The title, Science is an Intellectual Adventure, you won't be surprised, is proposed by the men we like to call Super Pedro. I don't know if his countrymen use that language all the time, but it's very well known in the wider scientific world. And I'm delighted that it's sponsored by these agencies. This one, as you know, is created as a government foundation to support science in the Basque area. And this is a newly founded academy with a wonderful name. I understand it means wisdom in Basque, and that's so appropriate because, of course, Plato's Academy was really called by that. I wanted to start with a first slide as a reminder for some of you. I'm interested how many may have witnessed in 2005 the spectacular Einstein Fest, celebrating the 100th anniversary of his incredible year in 1905. It was a year when he finally managed to finish his graduate work and get his PhD, among other things like developing special relativity, which he had turned in for his thesis and it was rejected as not good enough. At any rate, he also is on a bike, as you see, and that's to acknowledge that we have twice had an opportunity to ride some formidable hills in the vicinity of Donostia, and some of our biking companions are in the audience. There's one right there, Thomas. And there'll be more about biking later, so I will work on that. Now, my talk tonight will have two parts. The first, I give you a menu here, is to describe, comment on the title, Science as an Adventure. I noticed that the title you suggested, Intellectual Adventure, has been shortened, possibly just because it's such a long word and didn't fit on so well, but also maybe because, at least if it's anything like the United States, the word intellectual is a bit suspicious. It almost conveys that, oh, this is going to be very fancy, very highbrow. Maybe people won't be comfortable with it. But actually, it's the other way around. Intellectual is certainly a key part of science. It's the distinguishing thing of the human species, we think, that is this part up here that has enabled us to figure out so much about the outer cosmos, the inner cosmos. It's allowed us, in short, to do science among art and many other things. But it's not just intellectual. The adventures in science are also aesthetic very often, and I have to stress that here in this country because my wife and I especially enjoy Spain because everything is so aesthetic. We were taken down once more than a kilometer in the earth to visit a dam built by Iberdrola. Huge generators. Only engineers go down to work there. But what did we see? A fabulous mural on the wall. A wonderful sculpture, one of these mobile sculptures like Caldor. And it shows, I've told many people about this, that in this country it's not imaginable to have any space without art in it. So there's this aesthetic thing, which is, I think, a very important part of scientific adventures. They contribute, as much as art and great architecture can, to a spiritual impact of the work. And they should remind us that this is part of our human adventure that's shared with everyone. It should be part and accessible to everyone. So I hope we can do a better job than in the past in broadening that, but it's certainly something that you are focused on here, and I'm delighted this new academy in particular, which includes not only science but all fields together interacting, is going to foster that. But you see, in this little outline, Pedro told me he was worried about my slipping on a molecule, but I said, that would be perfectly appropriate. Don't worry about it. Begin with, as I like to emphasize, whoops, I pressed the wrong button. We got the laser to operate here. I would emphasize that it all stems from wonder. I mean, when we were all born, the first thing we must be doing early on is wondering, where are we? What is this world inhabited by these large creatures who make funny sounds and all the rest? And for the first few years, everyone is a scientist and artist. All these little kids, absolutely. Then when they go to school, for many of them, somehow they're discouraged from thinking of being a scientist or an artist. You must have thought about that. I've often thought about that. At any rate, that's part of what I'm going to remark about in commenting on the 4 special attributes I want to emphasize. But of course, adventure is a perfect word because it's the appeal of mystery. It conveys that. Something that's very special, unusual, novel, and exploration above all. There's a kind of feeling that an adventure always involves a little risk and uncertainty. And yet we know that scientific adventures often turn out very happily and in fact can achieve things that transform civilization. So I've listed 4 categories here and a couple of comments under each one I'll go through. And then in the second part of the talk, I want to explore with you a saga of a series of short stories that illustrate these special attributes of scientific adventures that I want to comment here. The first one I have here is understanding waits patiently. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that this is worth emphasizing because so many of you, I think, most people, when they encounter science in school, high school, college, wherever, and you encounter it in the general atmosphere, the idea is it's something very hard. It's remote. It's only to be expected by special people to study it. And yet, if you back up a ways and ask yourself, why is it that there's so much progress in science? We read all the time about remarkable things developed. How is that? I think the basic reason is that what you're after in science, understanding what nature is doing and all, waits patiently for you. It doesn't change. Now compare that with other enterprises, business, politics, sports, war, sadly. You may think of a very good move, but while you're preparing to implement it, the proper objective changes. And then you make this move anyway, whoops, it turns out to be a very bad move, not a good move at all. It's like a chess game. You don't have an opponent who waits patiently for you and lets you keep trying over and over till you get the right move. I like to say to students that to be a scientist is something like being a musician. Even if you have talent, you need to work hard to master your instrument and the literature and understand the culture so you can perform properly. But in science, you can, and in fact, by the nature of things, you really will often play almost all the notes wrong, but then get one right. And you'll be appropriately applauded for getting one right. That's a definite advantage. So that's the point, a way to put it. What a great advantage it is to have the chance. We look historically at what happens in major scientific advances, and you see again and again the reason is that it didn't count if you made various mistakes, had the wrong idea and so on. You kept after it, And someone, often someone who was a maverick, who did things in a way that other people thought were maybe not too smart or right or sensible or not according to the general consensus, makes the great progress. But I think it's basically why you make abiding progress that really matters in science consistently. It's not because scientists are so much smarter than other people, it's because they don't have to be. Another example I use for young people is, you know, there's this basketball player, Shaq O'Neal, 7'10". He can almost reach the basket from the free throw line, drop the ball in. He only scores 50% of his free throws. But if he were doing science, he'd get an unlimited number of free throws, so he'd always make them. You see, that's the point I want to make. That's a real advantage. And yet, the way you meet science in school doesn't give you that impression. You only get one chance in the exam to get it right or not. And it's very discouraging if you don't. Second, it should be emphasized, science is intrinsically social and cooperative. I was asked by